So, welcome guys to this new lecture video of the Neuropharmacology series. Today we will be learning about the sympathetic nervous system. Before entering directly into the sympathetic nervous system, let's quickly revise the types of ganglia, which we studied in the previous video. As I told earlier, that sympathetic ganglion could be formed in three different places. One could be just lateral to the vertebra, one could be following its own course and forming ganglia somewhere else than these lateral ganglia or paravertebral ganglia, and some neuron may go very near or close to the target organ and form the terminal ganglia. When we look to the course of this ganglia or the neurons in this ganglia, we may find that in paravertebral ganglia or chain ganglia, which is located just lateral to the vertebra, here, here, or here. It is throughout the spinal cord. We may notice that it arises from the lateral horn, and this preganglionic fiber follows the course of white rami communicants. We call these as white rami communicants because these preganglionic fiber are myelinated, and the neuron which are myelinated appear white. So this course is known as white rami communicants, and it forms synapse here at the chain ganglia or paravertebral ganglia. And the postsynaptic neuron follows the course of gray rami communicants. It is called so because these postsynaptic neurons does not have myelin sheath, so it appears gray in color. So this tract followed by postsynaptic neuron is known as gray rami communicants, and it goes to the target organ. Okay, so this is one course of the neuron in the paravertebral ganglia, and the another course could be it arises from the lateral horn, follows this white rami communicants, and it may go downward to the another chain ganglia, or it may go upward to form the another chain ganglia, but it may also live on its own without following these gray rami communicants. Okay, and it may form ganglia outside the chain ganglia, which we call them as prevertebral ganglia. Got it? Okay, this is second type of ganglia. First one is chain or paravertebral ganglia. Second one is prevertebral ganglia. And what do we call these nerves, which do not follow the gray rami communicants, which live on its own path? We call these nerves as visceral nerve or splanchnic nerves. Okay, we'll be encountering this splanchnic term in many cases of the sympathetic nervous system. And another form of ganglia is when the ganglia is formed so near to the target tissue or target organ. We will find this type of ganglia in mainly urinary bladder and also in the adrenal medulla. Okay, so there are three types of ganglia of the sympathetic nervous system. One is just lateral to the vertebra. We call them as paravertebral or chain ganglia. One follows its own path, does not follow the gray rami communicants and form the ganglia elsewhere than the paravertebral ganglia. We call those as prevertebral ganglia. And the third form of the ganglia, which we will encounter, is very near to the target tissue, sometimes embedded in the target tissue. We call those as terminal ganglia. So let's go to the sympathetic nervous system now. So here is a beautiful picture of the sympathetic nervous system, and I want you guys to understand that there are some basic difference between the sympathetic system and parasympathetic system and its origin. Here we can see in the sympathetic system, the neurons are arising from the level of T1 to L2. In some books, you can find this up to the level of L3. So we call this neuronal flow as the thoracolumbar outflow. We call that sympathetic outflow is thoracolumbar outflow. But in parasympathetic system, the neurons arise from the cranial level. Some of the cranial nerves are associated with the functioning of the parasympathetic system, and also some of the sacral neurons, or the neurons arising from the sacral region of the spinal cord. So we call the outflow of the parasympathetic system as the craniosacral outflow. So we will be discussing parasympathetic system in the separate video. Right now we are focusing on the sympathetic system. So as you can see here, the origin point of sympathetic neuron is from the lateral horn of the spinal cord. Okay, And as I mentioned you earlier, that the pre-ganglionic sympathetic nerve fiber can have many routes. It can either go in the upward direction and form ganglion somewhere here. It can either move downward direction and form ganglion somewhere here or here. Okay, and it can also form ganglion just adjacent to its respective vertebra here. Okay, whatever the position of this ganglion are, the pre-ganglionic nerve fiber follows the course of white rami communicants, and the post ganglionic nerve fiber follows the course of gray rami communicants. So these ganglion are termed as chain ganglion. Okay, and there are some nerve fibers which do not synapse at the level of chain ganglion. Okay, it directly synapse at somewhere farther from the chain ganglion. So what do we call this ganglion? We call this ganglion as prevertebral ganglion. So this is an example of prevertebral ganglion. And what do we call those nerves which do not synapse at the level of chain ganglion? We call those nerves as splanchnic nerve. So this is an example of splanchnic nerves. Okay, got it? Okay, so moving ahead. From the level of T1 to T4 or sometimes T5, some of the preganglionic sympathetic neurons move in the upward direction from here, from here, from here. Okay, it move in the upward direction and form the ganglion at this level. We call this ganglion as superior cervical ganglion. Okay, and the post-ganglionic nerve fiber from this ganglion supplies to some vital organs like eye, lacrimal glands, which form the tear, and the major salivary glands like submaxillary gland, sublingual gland, and parotid gland. Okay, so we will be discussing individual effect of sympathetic activation on these organs. So I want you guys to imagine that you are getting chased by your tiger. So what is your normal body response when you are getting chased by your tiger? Do you look for further protecting options? Do you further your vision or do you narrow your vision? Of course, we further our vision. We need to look for options to get protected from the tiger. Okay. So what do we do to look further? Do we dilate our pupil or do we constrict our pupil? Of course, we dilate our pupil. We need to look at many options available near us. Okay. So how does this dilation of the pupil occur? So if I make an eye here, this is the pupil. We need to dilate this pupil. Okay. Let fill this color with black. Okay. The pupil is surrounded by many muscles. Some of the major important muscle are radial muscle. These all are radial muscle. Okay. It is arranged in somewhat like spikes in the bicycle wheel. This is the bicycle wheel. Remember the spikes in the bicycle wheel. This is arranged in that form. Okay. This is radial muscle. Radial muscle. Or sometimes we also call it as dilator pupillae muscle. Name implies the action. Okay. Dilator pupillae muscle. So, if we look to the innervation of the radial muscle, it is innervated by alpha 1 adrenergic receptor. We will be covering this receptor in separate video of the adrenergic playlist. Right now, just understand that radial muscle is supplied with this receptor, and this receptor works through the GQ pathway. GQ pathway. And the secondary messengers involved in the GQ pathway are IP3 and DAG. Okay, and this eventually increases the concentration of calcium. And when the calcium is increased, it increases the activity of MLC kinase enzyme. And when the MLC kinase enzyme is activated more, it helps in the phosphorylation of myosin, and myosin needs to be phosphorylated for the interaction with actin. And when the actin and myosin is interacted, there is a formation of slide which eventually helps in the contraction. So look here, when the sympathetic activation occurs, GQ pathway is activated, it increases IP3 and DAG, which eventually increases the level of calcium. And when the calcium level is elevated, it increases the activity of MLC kinase. MLC kinase is very much important for the phosphorylation of myosin. And when the myosin is phosphorylated, it is able to interact with the actin molecule, and it helps in the slide and eventually in the contraction. So imagine the force or direction of the contraction of the radial muscle. It contracts in this way. It contracts in this direction. So imagine that you are pulling this pupil in this direction. So what is the effect of this? It eventually it eventually increases the length of the pupil or size of the pupil. The pupil is increased by this mechanism. Okay, one is this pathway. One responsible pathway is this for the dilation of the pupil. We also term this dilation as mydriasis or far vision. Okay, far vision. Another thing needed for the accommodation of the vision is the increase in the length of the lens. How does it occur? Okay, let's look into it. So this is our lens. We need to increase the size of the lens. So how does it get increased? The muscle you see here in purple color is actually ciliary muscle. Ciliary muscle. Okay, and these muscles are supplied by beta 2 receptors. All beta receptors of adrenergic receptor are supplied with G stimulatory pathway. When sympathetic activation occurs, G stimulatory pathway is activated. It increases the level of cyclic AMP, and when the cyclic AMP is increased, it actually inhibits the MLC kinase pathway, which was responsible for the interaction of myosin and actin. So eventually, there is less interaction of myosin and actin, which leads to relaxation of the muscle. Relaxation of the muscle. So imagine in this way, these ciliary muscle are so much constricted at the parasympathetic condition. So it is actually pushing the lens here at this direction. So it is constricting the size of the pupil. But when it is relaxed, these muscles fiber are pulled in this direction, pulled in opposite direction. So what does it creates? It creates the force in this direction, which eventually increases the size of the lens. Okay, in this way our lens is accommodated in the sympathetic activation. Okay, got it. So moving onwards towards the lacrimal gland. What is the effect of sympathetic activation on lacrimal glands? So it basically increase tear production slightly. Okay, there is slight increase in the level of tear production for the clearing of the bacteria and toxins which our eye encounters during the stress condition. And what is the major effect on the lacrimal gland is that it increases the protein content and enzyme content in the tear for the bactericidal effects of the tear. Okay, because in stress condition our eye is getting exposed to many bacteria and toxins. So similar effect is occurred also in the salivary glands like submaxillary, sublingual and parotid gland. And I want you guys to understand that during the stress condition all our digestive processes are getting inhibited because we are focused more on saving our lives than to digest the burger we have eaten in the lunch. So inhibitory effect is seen in the digestive system. So these all glands are responsible for production of saliva, and we do not need the production of saliva during the stress condition. So the level of saliva production is decreased, and the protein content and the thickness of saliva is increased. Okay, thickness of saliva increased is increased. So this is the sympathetic effect on eye, lacrimal glands and salivary glands supplied by superior cervical ganglion. And if you wonder how the production of saliva is decreased during the sympathetic activation, then what actually happens is that the blood vessel supplying to these glands is actually constricted because the blood is flown to the vital organs like heart and brain. Okay, so this is how the production of saliva is decreased. So moving onwards, some of the neurons from the level of T1, T2, T3, T4, and sometimes T5 actually synapse just adjacent to its vertebra at this level of chain ganglion. These, okay, and some of the neurons from T1 to T5 actually can go in the upward direction and from the synapse here. We call this ganglion as middle cervical ganglion. And some of the neurons can also form the ganglion at this level. We call this ganglion as inferior cervical ganglion. And all these middle cervical ganglion, inferior cervical ganglion, and all the postsynaptic fibers of this ganglion, along with this chain ganglion, supplies its innervation to heart, larynx, and trachea, and sometimes esophagus too. Okay, so what is the effect of this sympathetic activation on heart, trachea, and bronchi? We will be discussing. Okay, so what do we expect from our heart during the stress condition? We expect it to beat faster. So how does it occur? So when the sympathetic activation occurs, it actually increases the permeability of ion channels. It increases the permeability of ion channels near the SA node and AV node. So it is very, very vital for the beating of the heart. So when we increase the permeability of sodium channels and even L-type current channels of calcium or potassium channel, we actually depolarize the cell. Depolarize the cell. And when the cell is depolarized, it helps in the stronger contraction. Okay, and what effect we call when the heart is contracted strongly, we call this as ionotropic effect. Okay, so there is increase in the ionotropic effect, and it also increases the rate of contraction. Okay, when we increase the rate of contraction, we call this effect as chronotropic effect. So there is increase, or there is both positive effect on both ionotropic and chronotropic action. So it increases both the ionotropic and chronotropic action. It increases the rate of contraction, it increases the force of contraction, which eventually increases the cardiac output, and there is increased blood supply to the vital organs. And there is common effect on both trachea and bronchi. We need to expand our respiratory tract for more air to go inward. That will help in more energy and more activation of the uh, organs during the stress condition. So what occurs in the trachea or bronchi? So if I tell you that bronchi is supplied with beta receptor, more specifically the beta 2 receptor, you need to know that all the beta receptor of the adrenergic receptor are supplied with G stimulatory pathway. Okay, so when G stimulatory pathway is activated, what it does is it increases the cyclic AMP as I discussed earlier, and when the cyclic AMP is increased, it inhibits the MLC kinase. And when the MLC kinase is inhibited, it decreases the interaction of the myosin and actin by inhibiting the phosphorylation of the myosin head, and it eventually leads to relaxation. Okay, so the smooth muscle of the bronchi and trachea are relaxed, which helps in the bronchodilation. And when the bronchodilation is occurred, it allows more air to flow inward. Okay, so it is the effect on the trachea and bronchi. Moving onwards, I mentioned earlier that from the level of T5, T7 up to T9 or T8, the neurons or the preganglionic neurons do not follow the course of the gray MI communicants. It lives on its own pathway. This is their own path. Okay, and it from the junction of the nerves from the level of T5 to T8 and from the greater splanchnic nerves. Okay, I discussed earlier why it is called splanchnic. Okay, when the splanchnic nerve is reached near the celiac region of the abdomen, it forms the ganglion there. And this ganglion is an example of prevertebral ganglion. We call this ganglion as celiac ganglion. And the post-ganglionic nerve fiber of the celiac ganglion supplies to mainly the visceral organs like esophagus, stomach, and abdominal blood vessels, also the liver and bile duct, and all the structure associated mainly with the digestion, like pancreas, small intestine, and also it supplies to the adrenal gland. Okay, when we look in these visceral organs, we have already gained the idea that in the stress situation or in the sympathetic activation, these digestive organs or the digestive processes occurring in these organs should be inhibited. So, in the esophagus, the same mechanism occurs. The smooth muscle of the esophagus is relaxed, which prevents the contraction. And what do we call the contraction of the smooth muscle of esophagus? We call it peristalsis. So in esophagus, there is inhibition of peristalsis because we do not really focus on digesting the lunch we had. Okay, and same thing occur in the stomach. Okay, we decrease the acid production, and we also decrease the contraction of the stomach. Okay. So what effect occurs in the abdominal blood vessel? The same effect as we have seen in the blood vessel supplying to parotid gland. It constricts because we need blood to be preserved for the vital organs for survival. Okay, so we do not really need the blood vessel to supply more to the digestive organs. So the blood vessels near the abdomen, or the blood vessels supplying the visceral organs, should be constricted to reduce the blood flow to those organs. So moving on to the liver and bile duct, what effect occur in the liver? As we know, liver is the storehouse of glucose. Glucose is formed and stored in the form of glycogen in the liver, glycogen in the liver, and we need the glucose level to rise up for meeting the energy demand during the stress condition. So what occurs is that there is breakdown of glycogen. What do we call the process of breaking down of glycogen? We call it glycogenolysis. Okay, glycogen is breakdown by glycogenolysis to form or to release more glucose to meet the energy demand during the stress condition. And what effect does sympathetic activation show in the bile duct? It reduces the secretion of bile. Okay, it reduces the secretion of bile. Easy. Okay, we just need to inhibit our digestive and absorptive process. Okay, so moving onward to the pancreas, we all know that pancreas have two major kind of cells, alpha cells and beta cells. Alpha cells helps to increase the level of glucose, and beta cell decreases the level of glucose. So we need more expression of alpha cells. So in sympathetic activation, the activity of alpha cell is increased and the beta cell activity is lowered. Okay, so this is the effect shown in the pancreas. And also the exocrine part of pancreas, which secretes the pancreatic amylase, these are also inhibited because we do not really focus on the digestion during the stress condition. So you can see here one of the post-ganglionic fiber is supplying to the adrenal gland. So in the sympathetic condition or sympathetic activation, we really want our sympathetic neurotransmitter to be released in the more higher concentration. So one of the major sympathetic neurotransmitter is norepinephrine, which is secreted by this gland. So all of the effects you see here, all of the effects you see here above and below is directly influenced by the activity of the hormone secreted by this adrenal gland. So there is the more expression of the enzymes associated with the formation of the norepinephrine in the adrenal gland. So this is the effect of sympathetic activation, and this activation leads to increment in the all those activities which you have learned before. Okay, so moving on, you can see that from the level of T10 to T12, there are some nerves arising and conjoining the celiac ganglion and innervating the same organs which is supplied by the post-ganglionic fiber of celiac ganglion. Okay, we have also discussed the superior mesenteric ganglion. So you can see the vertebra of T12, L1 and L2. From these location, there are nerves arising and forming inferior mesenteric ganglion. These are also the splanchnic nerves. It is forming inferior mesenteric ganglion. Sometimes this ganglion is also known as the aortorenal ganglion also. Okay, because it supplies majorly to the kidney and bladders. Okay, so what our kidney needs to do during the stress condition? Do we need to urinate during the stress condition? I guess no. So there is the decrease in the glomerular flow of the kidney. So in kidney there is decrease glomerular blood flow. Okay, blood flow, blood flow, and there is the constriction of the sphincter to not urinate. Okay, it constricts the pathway of the urine flow. So these are the effects shown in the kidney. And in the bladder there are different kind of muscle. One of the important muscle is detrusor muscle. Okay, detrusor muscle. These muscle are mainly lining the bladder, and when this muscle contracts, it actually increases the pressure inside the bladder and helps to urinate. And during the sympathetic condition, we really don't have time to urinate, so these muscle need to be relaxed. Okay, so these are the effects shown in the kidney and the bladder. And some of the post ganglionic fibers also supply the gonads and external genitalia. And in case of the male, and remember this as uh, sympathetic is responsible for spilling or ejaculation. Okay, yes for yes, and parasympathetic means parasympathetic for pointing, P for P. So for erection, we need parasympathetic condition, and for spilling or ejaculation, we need sympathetic condition to activate. Okay, so these are the effects on the various organ during the sympathetic activation. So we will be covering parasympathetic system in the another video. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. So hit the like button and hit the subscribe if you like the content, and we will be discussing parasympathetic condition in the another video. Thank you.